Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Europa Rediviva. The issue I'd like to talk about today is the fact that it is highly idiotic to try to stifle free speech under the guise of fighting disinformation so as to preserve democracy and allegedly to preserve a free society, because it is freedom what defines us and what takes us apart from countries from the axis of evil. Just like George W. Bush used to say, they hate our freedom. This is why the terrorists attack us. So to go further with this neocon logic, just like Victoria Nuland and the former FBI director, I forgot his name, said in a recent debate against Stephen Walt and John Mersheimer, Iran is just a monster, and Russia is a monster, and China is a monster, and you cannot talk to the monsters. You should just fight them. And there is no diplomacy possible. This is also why the West abandoned diplomatic pursuit in general. So whereas previous iterations of modern societies used to have a diplomatic corps exactly for the purpose of liaising not with allies but with non-allies, with countries that might be rivals or even enemies, but still the idea, the paradigm was that you should have a diplomatic corps, you should have people trained in how to talk to their counterparts, trained in international law, that they know what kind of agreements they could reach, and that they knew something about the other party, besides just being monsters. So they knew something about Iranian society if they were diplomats to Iran, they knew something about Russian society if they were diplomats to Russia, and so on. This is the previous paradigm. Unfortunately, we have come to this point in the evolution of Western society, where all sorts of institutions that we developed when we were more intelligent came to be used by people like our current set of leaders, who are not so well intellectually endowed and are not so educated and do not understand their purpose. So, of course, the most obvious example, the easiest pick, would be Donald Trump and the fact that he does not do diplomacy, he just sends business people that he's friends with on various missions. Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law Jared Kushner are just his envoys, and he sends them to Russia, he sends them to negotiate with Iran. Those people are not trained in diplomacy, they don't even know what to discuss, in the sense that an agreement between states has to do with international law, with a framework of cooperation, or at least of dispute settlement, a framework of arms reduction or security guarantees, or something that has to do with states, has to do with international public law, so to say. They just go there to negotiate business deals, so private law and business law. And they are not educated into the matters that Russia or Iran or China or any country might be interested in discussing. They have no idea how a state functions, they have no idea what they should be discussing with their counterparts. A war, for example, even a proxy war, is something that cannot be solved through deals, through business deals. Business deals can be something collateral, but you cannot solve a war by, making a joint venture. It's not. It's from a different register. It's from a different realm. And because our societies have become more and more idiotic with the passing of time, also the electorate does not perceive this contradiction, does not perceive this inadequacy between the tools that we use and the outcomes we want to achieve. And they do not regard the erosion of institutions as something necessarily bad or as something contradictory. And it's the same with this whole fight against disinformation and fact-checking networks and, you know what I mean. It has gotten so bad that people who are doing the fighting against disinformation and who are now institutionalized, they are part of the state apparatus in various Western countries and in Western institutions such as the European Union and NATO. And these people are so poorly endowed intellectually that they fail to see the contradiction between what they are doing and the pretense of a free society, the thing that they pretend to defend from bad actors, from the likes of Russia and China and so on. So I had the displeasure today to watch a dystopic conference unfold hosted by the Romanian presidency, where some people, some NGO people, claimed to represent public authority, to say that they've implemented this under the auspices of the Romanian presidency, even though they presented it more or less as a private initiative. But they said it's a permanent, ongoing monitorization process and disinformation fighting mechanism. And it was so dystopian because they could not see the contradictions between what they were doing and what they were claiming. So I was thinking these people probably have an IQ of 85, 90. They cannot have an IQ above 90. And they're the kind of people who read a dystopic novel, like they read George Orwell's 1984 or Kafka's The Trial, and they don't get it. If you ask them what the book was about, they will tell you about the plot, but they're the kind of people that fail to notice the point. Kafka didn't write The Trial in order to detail the intricacies of somebody's trial. He was trying to make a point of how absurd it would be if you were deemed such a bad person that you were not allowed even to know the charges that you had to defend yourself from, so that you could not prepare some sort of defense. You did not know the charges, you did not know even the realm of the charges, so to prepare some documents from a certain realm of your life, from a certain aspect of your life, to prove something. So the whole absurdity of the idea of not having the premise of innocence when beginning a trial, the assumption of innocence. So they are the kind of people that bomb for peace. That I don't know. It's I mean, there are so many contradictions in the Western speech and in the Western measures, and they fail to notice them. And the people who do notice them are labeled disinformers. So their whole presentation was on how they track disinformation in Romanian society, on the Romanian internet sphere, and they never stopped for a moment to say what disinformation was. They just went in this circular logic in which they said that the dissenting narratives were pushed by disinformers, because this is Russia's hybrid strategy against the West, to sow dissent by amplifying discord and dissent inside of society and to increase polarization. So they basically identified as being disinformation what certain people said, and then they ascribed those same people the label of disinformers because they were putting out what the presenters had already labeled as disinformation. But when they listed the narratives, it was basically any public grievance that somebody might express, any problem that somebody might have with the government, high inflation, the budgetary crisis, allocation of funds to Ukraine, the prospect of war, fear of war. This was also considered a disinformation narrative. The fact that the elections were annulled 2 years ago. Basically, any grievance that a Romanian might have was essentially listed as a disinformation narrative, and they aggregated all of these grievances. They counted them, and they made a top 10 of the biggest disinformers, which the biggest disinformers were just the people who were issuing these dissenting opinions with the highest rate of success, so with the highest reshares, the biggest reach. Luckily, this was done from March to May, so I had already closed my Facebook account in January. Otherwise, I would have probably also been there in the top 10 disinformers of Romania, because my reach was, I don't remember how Facebook counted it. I think it was on a quarterly basis, and it was a seven-figure reach that I had before deleting my account, because it was because I had strikes on it from funky citizens, from the Romanian fact-checking network sponsored by the European Commission and by the American State Department, and therefore I could not monetize it. And yeah, they basically deem opposition politicians and media personalities as disinformers because they say things which go against governmental position. And it's even worse than that. There are certain positions that can be either they can be either disinformative or informative, depending on the time and on the moment. For example, Russia is going to attack us. When the war in Ukraine began, the narrative that was propagated through the NATO channels was that this was an unprovoked war. Why was it important to say that it was unprovoked? For many reasons, one of them being to stoke fear into the other countries by claiming that this could have happened to any other country, that Ukraine is absolutely nothing special, and it could have happened to absolutely any other country, which means that it will happen to any other country. So the narrative was meant to garner support for arming Ukraine, for sending weapons to Ukraine, on the principle that Russia will not stop in Ukraine, and after it's done with Ukraine, it will invade the rest of Europe. And I said at the time that it's an absurd thesis, it's an absurd proposition. There are certain reasons for which Russia attacked Ukraine, and they are particular to Ukraine. They pertain to this conflict, and it's not something generalizable. Russia did not by accident invade Ukraine. It invaded Ukraine for some reasons which cannot be replicated by, of course, if somebody really tries to become like Ukraine, it might be able to replicate. But generally speaking, conditions were not replicable to other countries, so that other countries might think, well, if Russia invaded Ukraine, it might invade me as well. And from 2022 until basically today, I thought, and I said publicly, that this is a dumb narrative. That this is just meant to stoke fear in the public, and it's just meant to garner support, but there is no danger. Now I've changed my mind. Now I think that there is quite a high probability that Russia might attack us, because we've gotten so involved in the war that Russian mouthpieces are saying that at some point they will have to attack a NATO country to prove a point, to prove the fact that they are not without red lines, as NATO countries believe. And now this is also a matter of disinformation, even though it's the opposite of what was disinformation then, and even though it's exactly what the official government position was then, now it is still disinformation, because it is said by the same people, and because the official point of view is a contradictory one. It still says that Russia will invade every other country and it's a threat to world peace and whatever, but at the same time that it would not dare to attack NATO, because this is why NATO is trying to integrate Ukraine, so as to prevent the continuation of Russia's attacks on it, because Russia would not dare to attack a NATO country. So it's a contradictory paradigm. It's a contradictory mind frame. However, it is perpetuated because both sides of the argument are useful for the propaganda machine. And if I say that Russia is not a threat to us and it would not attack us, if I say it in the context that we should not support Ukraine, then what I'm saying is disinformation. But also if I say the opposite, it is still disinformation, because I also say it in the context of perhaps we helped Ukraine too much and perhaps we're too involved in the war. And then it's disinformation because basically disinformation is judged according to the ends. It is not judged on the truth value of the proposition, of the statement. It is judged regarding the ends of the statement. If the ends are meant to support the Russian narrative, then it is disinformation. It doesn't matter if it's true or false. And this is also acknowledged by organizations like Funky Citizens. For example, when they were censoring people on the internet, they were giving this explanation from the start. They were no longer pretending that certain things were not based in truth or whatever. They were just saying this statement favors the Russian point of view, therefore it is disinformation. End of story. So this is where we're going. We're going into a direction in which if you do not parrot exactly what the government said today, if you say something that the government might have said previously, for example, then you're still committing an act of disinformation. And it's become pretty dystopic. I mean, there are European Union citizens like Hussein Dogru who are sanctioned by the European Union. Their funds are frozen. They're not able to work. They're not able to support their family. They're not able to travel and so on for doing journalist work and for what the European Commission pretends that is a furthering of the Russian point of view, even though the guy was doing advocate journalism on Palestine, activist journalism on Palestine. But still, apparently, if you support Palestine, then you're somehow against the West, and if you're against the West, that's supporting the Russian point of view, and therefore you're a Russian disinformator, and then they included him in the sanctions packages against Russia. Because why not? Things don't have to make sense anymore. So, in the Romanian case, Romania is a bit special, so I would not really generalize it. This is also why I left Romania. Romania has the misfortune of being a frontline state, but among the frontline states, it also has the misfortune of being a low IQ society. I know it sounds politically incorrect, but unfortunately it's true. So this is why Romania will be even more dystopian than the rest of the frontline states. Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, the Baltics, Finland, Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Slovakia, all of these are frontline states. But Romania has this peculiarity. It is a reason why the literature of the absurd appeared in Romania. Romania has this property of the people not sensing the absurd and behaving according to it without being able to recognize it. So this is why dystopia is going to be really bad in Romania. But this is something that to a lesser extent is done all across the European Union. So the official narrative of the European Union is that Russian propagandists are not people who promote Russia. They are people who sow doubt towards the official points of view, towards the official paradigms, irrespective of the topic. So if you go against the green agenda, if you go against deindustrialization, if you go against the policy of carbon reduction, atmospheric carbon reduction, then you're also a Russian propagandist, because this is what Russia would do. Russia would stoke dissent. If you're against the closing of the nuclear power plants, you're also a Russian disinformer, because what would Russia do? Russia would try to go against governmental policy. If you go against the woke agenda, the trans agenda in children and so on, also a Russian disinformer. So in these conferences, they no longer even pretend to try to identify what disinformation is and how to distinguish between between intentional disinformation and regular opinion, regular dissenting opinion. No. There are two camps. You're either with us or against us, just like George W. Bush used to say. You're either with us or with the terrorists, and if you're with the terrorists, we're going to punish you. Of course, during the times of George W. Bush, even though the Patriot Act came into force, and even though there was this curtailment of rights and freedoms in the United States, yet they did not go so far like the European Union is going with sanctioning its own citizens in an extrajudicial manner for acts of speech, for acts of opinion. The United States, unfortunately for us, never went so far as to sanction its own citizens for matters of speech. The European Union has no qualms, has no hesitations about these things. It will go in fully. And unfortunately, Romania will be the most totalitarian place, because even though even though there is perhaps half of society which does not adhere to this bullshit, that half of society is not organized, and it cannot pose meaningful resistance, whereas the other half is just organized by Brussels. So it is just receiving these, it is made up of imbeciles at the top, it is receiving these instructions what to do, and those imbeciles just act on it, just implement it without any thought process. They do not realize what they are doing, because in general they're not used to thinking. So they are good imitators. They're at the intellectual level of some species of primates, because there are other species of primates which can use tools and can come up with original solutions and all these things. But there are other species of primates which just imitate, and they are at this level. So the pro-European politicians and the NGO workers and the media people and all of this ecosystem of the rules-based order and of the people who go on political protests in support of the government to say that they want blue jeans and bananas. These people are at the level of some primate species which cannot think for themselves, which cannot be creative and cannot come up with their own solutions. So they're just they just function through mimicry. They just imitate. They are given a set of instructions. They implement it. They applaud. They think of themselves very highly. They think that they are intelligent because they are praised by the Brussels bureaucrats, and this is what makes them on the right side of history. And this is where their thought process ends. And if you criticize them, you're a disinformer and a Russian agent. It's a very simple logic. Nothing needs to be proven. Everything is self-evident through your positioning, because you're either with us or with the terrorists. And if you're not with us, then you're with the terrorists. And it's a very simple thought process. It makes things very simple. This is why also when you see them in conferences, they have no wrinkles on their forehead, like just like they have no wrinkles on their brain. It's like smooth, very, very smooth surface, both in and out. Very calm, very serene. They're very happy with what they do. They don't see any contradictions. They're on the right side of history. They're fighting the bad guys. They are not censoring. They are enhancing freedom. This is how they might put it. I saw this category of people first during the vaccine crusade. So during 2021, during the vaccine mandates, they were so relaxed about saying that there's no problem if the end point is putting us in camps, us the unvaccinated, supporting points like, well, if you didn't take the vaccine, that it means you renounced your quality of a citizen, right? Your status of a human rights holder. So what's the problem then? No human rights are infringed because you no longer have human rights, and they were so serene about it. And I can't wait for the war to start, because they will be out on television and also with this very, very serene attitude, explaining to us how lists of bad people are continuously being compiled, and the bad people will be put to camps, so all the good people can rejoice, and that they are on the right side of history, and that whoever says that that's a totalitarian thing to do is with the enemy, and that they should their critics should go and read dystopic novels, because they're on the wrong side of history, and they should embrace freedom and so on. So because they are not intellectually endowed, and they're not well gifted with reason, they cannot see the contradiction of their own acts, and they engage in these repressive policies without even acknowledging, without even being able to acknowledge how repressive they are and how much they go against their intended purpose. So if their intended purpose is to guard freedom in our society, freedom should be for the dissenters, not for the obeyers. This is how I see it. Human rights are for those whose human rights might be infringed, not for those whose human rights are protected. You cannot say, well, we protect human rights for the people who agree with us, and the rest, we do not infringe upon their human rights because they don't have human rights, because we do not consider them human. End of story. You cannot say these things and still pretend to be a democrat. But this is where we live in, this is the reality of the West, and people like me are labeled disinformers and are censored and banned, and this is why I have to speak in English, and so as not to be considered a part of the Romanian media space, because things have gotten so bad that, for example, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, the foundation of the Christian Democratic Party of Germany, sponsors these articles in the Romanian mainstream media about people like me, about just people who write stuff on the internet, and it's a blame and shame type of press. What have the disinformers written about today? And they're given their names and their profile pictures and everything, and they're being shamed for being Putin propagandists and whatever because they don't like the price increases or they don't like the salary cuts or all of these things. And the end result is the opposite. So I know quite a lot of people who have started thinking that they might need to know some Russian or some Chinese in the future to fill out the application forms for political asylum. So if this is what the Democrats and the liberals wanted as a future of a free society in the West, they are the main illustration of the idea why you should not give the Kalashnikov to the monkey, because they do not know how to use such sophisticated instruments as the institutions that our society has developed until now, and that these people are unable to understand and to put to good use. This is what I wanted to talk to you about today. If you like what I do, like, share, subscribe. You'll find the link in the description of the channel if you want to support me financially. And until next time, take care. Bye.